Hello, and welcome to the Creation Kit scripting series, Papyrus tutorials. We're continuing with the events and functions unit. This is going to be the 18th part of it, and we are going to cover functions with constant parameters. And we're going to move away from arrays. We've covered most everything that we can at the moment with them. So, let's just do a brief relook at parameters. It's been a while since the variable section. Parameters are basically variables passed into the functions. We've seen it with factorial. If you've used any sort of move to or anything like that, you would have noticed you had to enter in the actor or object you're moving. Here's just some move NPC function I thought of randomly, and you give it a target NPC to move this to. So what are default values? They are just things that are default to the parameter, so you don't have to enter them. Which means you don't have to enter them, but you can if you want to. The move to function is a good example of this. The one thing that's required always is whatever target that you want to move to, like NPC Bob move to player or something like that. And notice how there's the variables for the offsets and then the rotations. And in the last episode, we used the rotations for the hellskeevers, but you don't have to use them. So let's take a closer look at this, because there's an important concept here with default values. If you want to change one that's later on down the line, say AB match rotation, then you must change all the ones before it. Otherwise, you won't match the structure of the function. But if you didn't care about any of that, you can still use it with just the target in there. Or you could use the target, and then if you want to change only the Y offset, you would enter in the X offset and Y offset, but you don't have to enter in the Z or the match rotation, so on and so forth. So let's actually construct a function. So I'm going to go here. We're going to look at the move to function. Let's look in our creation kit. I made a barrel, function's default parameters. I gave them two properties, something called a holy Dremora and a tiny centurion. And if we look in the cell, we can see both of those items here, or those actors here, excuse me. So the goal I'm thinking of for what we're going to do in a moment is have a function whenever we initialize. We call that function, we pass it in one NPC and then default it to have another NPC. And what's going to happen, it's going to call the game's move to function. One of them using the default, one of them not. And one of them it's going to move to the player, and then one of them is going to have an offset associated with it. Just to illustrate what you can do with default values. So, let's look at the source and open it up in Notepad++. We're going to go with the onInit event. Go away update. We're not going to do that right now. So, what we want to do is now create a function. Don't give it any sort of move multiple NPCs to player. And then we're going to use an object reference, aka target, or aka source, and then object reference source 2, and then we're going to have this equal to the holy Dremora. So here we're going to have a aka source dot move to game dot get player, and then we're going to not give this one an offset of any kind. And now you're going to do AK source 2 dot move to, and then we're going to use the same get player function. This is not good form, but it's alright for the purposes of this episode. Let's only move them a little up and a little to the right, so we need a positive Y and a positive X. So let's say 25.0, 15.0. That way he's in front of you and to the right. And let's go ahead and introduce no Z offset, but we want to match the rotation of the player at the time. So they should be facing the same direction the player is facing when they move, when they come into the game. Now let's call the function on init, and then we're going to pass in tiny centurion only. And that should be it for that function. Let's make sure it compiles. Going back to our logic barrel, edit the source, save. No viable alternate input. I might have done that wrong. Let me see. Well, let's try that again and see if that works. I don't think we should have to make this call, but let me debug this real quick. I will get back into the video once I do debug it and explain what happened. Alright, we are back. Oh gosh. So, I should have done a little bit more research before trying to show what I showed a moment ago. I apologize on that. So, apparently you can only do primitives, such as strings, floats, and booleans, as default value parameters. I find that very unfortunate because it's not as powerful that way as coming from a programmer perspective, but that's okay. So what I've done is modified what we've been doing here, and we're going to use this, and then we're going to say that. But first, we're going to do another call of this without that. And I want to do message boxes. So we're just going to do a print message and a print message, not default to it, just illustrate how it can be used if you're doing custom messages or something like that. So let's make sure everything compiles. Here we go, it compiled. Good. So let's save and see the results in game. Alright, we should see in a moment the results of message boxes with defaults and the Dremora and Centurion move. It's not going to look as cool as I originally imagined. Okay, so we have a default message. It said default to us. And we have a not default. So they both moved here. is fine. And that's pretty much how you do default parameters right there. So we will go to the conclusion of the video where I'm going to add some addendums to what I was saying earlier. Alright, so for the addendums, I was not entirely correct when I said you must specify them in the order. You are able to pull a particular parameter if you give it the identifier name. So the move to function, if we look at that again, if you say move to the player, and if you wanted to change what the match rotation default was, you would just say AB match rotation, and then you say equals false to change that and leave everything else the same. And then as we saw earlier with the compile errors, you cannot use non-primitives such as object reference, actors, and such as default values, unfortunately. That is it for this episode. If you have any questions over the content, I know it was a little wishy-washy on the flow, but that's okay. Feel free to contact me on the Nexus, or on Steam, YouTube. Leave a message there if you have any special requests. Also, send it my way. I answer questions all the time. I've had several modders recently ask me questions about scripts, and I've gone through, spent the time, walked through it step by step, and have helped them out, I hope, on that. Anyway, until the next episodes,